into it? ZOOMCAST.
Log in and check it out.
We are on live. Welcome back. Episode 25, ZOOMCAST with Matt Grima. I, of course, am Matt Grima. We're on Australia's #1 real estate podcast, and those rankings are very unofficial. I do have with me one of the all-time greats, and I know I've used that intro a couple of times before, but I really do have one of the all-time greats. Just let me read this one out for some of the listeners tuning in. We're talking about a 5-time world champion rower, 4-time Olympian, 3-time gold medalist, 95 to 98, a member of the all-conquering awesome foursome. He's now one of our own at Marshall White. I speak of none other than the great Drew Ginn. Drew, welcome to ZOOMCAST.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me. Good to see you as well.
Nice to see you also. We're more face-to-face these days than the Zoom, but I've got no other platform to record these bloody things.
Well, you're doing well then. You've used technology well.
I've wanted to bring ZOOMCAST back for a little while. I've had a bit of a hiatus. The great Stephen Baster, champion jockey, was episode 24, and I think that was back in Feb or March. So it's been a long time. I've been busy doing what I'm doing at Team One and trying to list and sell some real estate in between. But I've wanted to revive it for a long time, and I thought, who else to get than the great Drew Ginn, who's joined us only a couple of months ago, and now the general manager of the Bayside Marshall White division.
Yeah, it's been great to join the team down here, and Kate Strickland reached out to me many months ago now, and wanted to see if I'd come and do the general manager role and help lead the group through that, and then got to meet a lot of the other key directors and signed on early July, and it's been a wonderful roller coaster trip, Matt, so far.
How do you work cut out for you, Drew? I mean, you've got some brilliant individuals down there. It's nice for those that don't know. Of course, you're not listing and selling real estate, but you are you're overseeing the operation down there. So you're building culture and connecting with people in perhaps a different way than what a more traditional real estate model might look like.
Yeah, definitely, and I think that's a real positive that Kate and Steve Smith and Matt Pelios as local directors wanted, and obviously Jack Bongiorno, Simon and James Connell, as well as having someone from outside. I think they saw and recognised that there was an opportunity here to just sort of go through a bit of a rebuild process, and I think what's been exciting for me is to know that I don't have to worry about the job of trying to sell the real estate, list real estate, appraisal, all that sort of stuff. I can purely focus my effort and energies on the group and on the team, and make sure that not only from our directors, but all the way down into every seated team member, that everyone's feeling part of the process and feeling valued and having a voice and getting a chance to sort of have really good plans going forward. So it's been good so far, just getting to know everyone, but also trying to make a bit of a difference as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll tell you what, if you're in a leadership position or you aspire to be a leader, I reckon the next 30 or 45 minutes you'd want to tune in. And I'll tell you why. So the ideology behind you being my guest hasn't just blossomed overnight, but something happened last week where I was having a conversation with one of our colleagues, and this person said, geez, all I hear about this Drew Ginn is some good stuff, but I've got no idea what the hell he does or how he does it. And I said, ting, light bulb moment, we'll have to get him on ZOOMCAST, and he can share some of the things that he's been doing at Bayside to get some quick wins. You're not a man that's probably enjoys the spotlight, Drew, and you've come into an industry where everybody enjoys the spotlight. This, of course, available on iTunes and Spotify, ZOOMCAST with me. But Drew, I want you to take us back to the beginning. So before you were world-class athlete, before you were doing what you're doing in the corporate world, take us back to the beginning. Drew Ginn, as a youngster, where did you go to school? Where did you grow up? What were your beginnings like?
Yeah, good question. I think I grew up in a little town called Inverloch, born in Leongatha, just up the road from there inland from the coast. And I think Inverloch had about 1,500 residents at the time. And what I remember vividly as a young kid was running around the street with a few mates, either going from the surf beach back into town, local surf shop, fish and chip shop, off to the BMX track, migrating our way back across to the football grounds and then back out to the surf beach. So they were, really active days. And the other part of living in a little town like that was my dad was a real estate agent down there, had his own business and had a few partners over the years, PBE Real Estate. And so I grew up with real estate in my family and saw the hours my dad put in and saw the work that was involved, I suppose, from a young kid's perspective. And then the town and the school, I was at Inverloch Primary for a number of years, New Haven College for a few years, went to Leongatha South as well, Leongatha Primary, I spent a little bit of time in Queensland, and then when I came back to Victoria, unfortunately, my mum passed away in 1987 and 88, and then got the chance to sort of return home and come back down here, and was then sent to boarding school in Melbourne to Scotch College for 4 years. And my dad swears black and blue that he'd always made a promise to my mum that he'd give me a private school education if he could afford it.
Yeah.
But on top of that, local town, as you can possibly imagine, Matt, myself and other kids were getting into a lot of trouble. So I think Dad saw it as a way of getting me out of that sort of potential lifestyle with being a young surfer and all that sort of stuff. So sent to boarding school for 4 years, and pretty much, the rowing career took off from that after I sort of got involved in the sport later on.
When you hit Scotch, how old are you?
I was year 9, so 15 years of age, 14 years of age. And I was blown away by how big that school was, and probably never really felt comfortable with the size of the school. And I think I actually made a deal with my dad very early on. I think the first drive up to Melbourne to go to and start at the boarding house, I made a deal and negotiations with my dad. My dad was a very good negotiator, by the way. And I thought at 15 or 14 years of age, I had a bargaining point, which was if I didn't enjoy the experience in the first 12 months, and if I didn't like it, could I come home? And Dad went, yeah, sure thing. If you don't enjoy it at the end of 12 months, you can come home. So I waited for 12 months, kept my powder dry, and all of a sudden at the end of that next summer was like, oh, Dad, I didn't enjoy it last year and I don't want to go back. And he said, that's bad luck, son. You get back in the car and off we go. So being sent to boarding school was pretty amazing because the opportunities were huge, but it also meant I was disconnected from my local friendship groups and the things I enjoyed doing, which was surfing and BMX riding at the time. So
yeah. I'm sorry to hear about Mum. I wasn't aware of that part of your story. How old were you when Mum passed?
Yeah, I was 11, 12 years of age, and Mum had cancer, and she must have been diagnosed, I think. My brother and I have talked about this a bit, as she was probably diagnosed and had known about it for about 18 months, and she decided not to go down the path of chemo treatment because I think she was given not a great outcome at that sort of stage, and she didn't want to sort of go through all the health issues that you get with chemo sometimes, and held off sharing that with myself and my brother. She might have actually told my brother, I'm not really sure, but certainly I found out late in the piece when she got quite sick and was in hospital. So, challenging thing for any young kid to go through, but certainly, one of those things that's hard to reconcile, but we all move on in life, and, always still feel really fortunate about, the upbringing that she gave me with my dad, and obviously everything my dad did for me after that in particular.
Yeah, that's she's a fair bit going on as a youngster. Obviously, the sadness of that particular situation. Then you're off to boarding school. When you get to Scotch, is that the first time that you pick up an oar?
Yeah, well, yeah, sort of, because I had a boarding house master, I think, first said to me, you should give rowing a go when I first arrived because I was tall. I think he reminded me many years after that I basically said rowing was for meatheads or some sort of flippant comment like that, and he never let me live that down. Yep. It was actually a maths teacher, Bram McLeod, who got me into the boat. I think it was late year 10 going into year 11, and he'd hassled me for a little bit at the end of maths class on a number of occasions at the end of the day, and eventually I sort of went down, and he sort of was the one that gave me the chance. I actually don't remember picking up the oar or the boat, but I do remember being in the boat, being given instructions and eventually falling in. And anyone who knows the Yarra River pretty well understands that you don't spend too much time in it, probably, particularly upstream. And so that was the first rowing experience. It was disastrous in many respects, but Bram was awesome at probably giving me a bit of confidence to sort of go back again and come back down to the sheds and get involved in, I think he had the 6th 8 for the school at the time. And I got stuck up the other end of the boat, and some simple instructions from the guy sitting in front of me, which was basically don't stuff it up, and whatever you do, take your blade, put your blade in the water with everyone, take it out with everyone, and just see if you can stay in time, and then just basically progress from that sort of thing. So if it hadn't been for him making the suggestion, I don't know that I actually would have ever started in the sport. That's for sure.
Yeah, amazing. At what stage? God, there's a lot to unpack. At what stage do you look at yourself and go, or somebody might have looked at you and said, "Hey, mate, you're actually really, really, really good at this. We strongly suggest that you pursue this in a more serious fashion." Do you remember that point?
I remember there's probably there's two occasions. One is having a coach like him take interest in getting you down to the sport, and part of the sell, I suppose, he gave me, which was, you got the right sort of levers and you're tall, and I'd been a cross-country runner, done athletics. I was playing basketball at the time, played football that year. So I was pretty good at all-round sport. I was able to sort of turn my hand to a lot of activities. I wasn't necessarily the best kid at any particular sport, but rowing then was interesting because I remember meeting, I think it was the head coach at the time, Paul McGann. James was coaching, James Tompkins, who I later rode in the Awesome Foursome with. Mike Mackay, Nick Green, Andrew Cooper was actually down at the school doing a bit of coaching as well. So I suppose for a lot of people, if you know the private school system, rowing is a private school sport. Sadly for me, I sort of look at it and go, it'd be a great sport if it was actually opened up more, because I think there's a lot of benefits to it, but it is costly. But I think Paul McGann, from memory, the head coach, had actually made a comment, probably strategically in earshot at the time, but he was like, oh, yeah, Drew's just like members of the Awesome Foursome, like James and Nick, same sort of build, tall and skinny, and a very aerobic sort of young kid. And so that would have been in my final year, in year 12.
Right.
So hearing that sort of information and then sort of, I suppose, getting a sense of what the Awesome Foursome were about. And I had James coach me that year, which was really helpful. But standing next to him, he's a bit taller than me by about 5 centimetres.
Right.
Nick Green's about the same, but very similar sort of build. So to hear how good they were in the sport, and then to have that association, and you've still got to believe in yourself a bit, but to have that association made, I'm sort of like, okay, well, they're amazing at what they're doing. I saw them win in Barcelona that year after our Head of the River period. And I think the penny sort of started to drop a bit more in terms of it was actually something that I really wanted to go after. So, but I'd always watched the Olympic Games on TV and thought it'd be cool to do. But it wasn't until I met like guys like James and Nick in the Awesome Foursome, similar sort of build, similar sort of comments that people made, that you sort of think it's maybe possible, but you never really deep down inside ever think that you're ever going to get there. So I think, it took a number of years to really feel like it was genuine, and a lot of work by that stage. But yeah, that was sort of 92.
The moment that you actually, talk to me about how you actually go from being recognised as a talent to being recruited into that formidable lineup.
Yeah. Well, if I could explain to you all the steps, it'd be a couple of hours long. But interestingly, so where it went was, you row at school, we're pretty successful at school, you won Head of the River. That sort of wasn't the reason why then I transitioned well into club. The reason why I transitioned into club was because a couple of my schoolmates, Sean Evans was a particular guy that I rode with in my Head of the River year, and he rang me at the end of summer, and I'd been down the farm most of the summer surfing and doing a bit of work on the property. And he gave me a call and said, hey, look, we've got a spare spot still available that we're trialling for. Would you come back and give it a go? So I'd stayed fit enough. And so then when I came back to the club, I performed pretty well on the rowing machine. And anyone who remembers the rowing machines at the gym and all that sort of stuff, they're horrible bits of equipment. But I'd kept fit. And so got into the Club 8 that year, then got into the state team that year. And that just blew me away, the fact that I hadn't really been focusing on it. But I'd been doing a lot of physical work, so I was fit and healthy and strong. And then very quickly, I sort of really got the bit between the teeth where I sort of went, okay, well, I want to have a crack at this. I remember telling my dad that I decided not to go to university. I actually, I think I got selected into a psychology degree for memory.
Wow.
And I rang my dad to say, this has happened. And he goes, oh, awesome, this is fantastic. Great, when does it all start? And I said, oh, hold on, Dad, I'm not going to take it. And this is 92. So, for me, it was that whole thing of, I just wanted to back myself to give sport a go. And then because Mercantile Rowing Club was there, a lot of the guys out of the 3 of the guys had been members of the club. There was a good pathway. And so it just made a lot of sense for me to be down the club, spend as much time there training, work through club selection, state selection, national selection. So in 94, I got selected in the under-23 Australian team. And the benefit there was Noel Donaldson, who was the Awesome Foursome coach, Matt. So getting to meet him after having those years of experience with James and Nick as younger coaches, meeting Noel and having Noel coaches in the under-23 crew, and just hearing the stuff he was describing, it was just, for me, it was just something that just made sense to follow that pathway and keep going. So one more year, got the chance to be at the Australian Institute of Sport, and then the spot on the Awesome Foursome popped up, and selectors actually gave me a vote of confidence, which was I brought the average age of the crew down considerably. So that was really nice for me to hear right before 96. And it was like a 4-year journey, but it's not a blur because I remember a lot of the steps, but it happened very, very quickly from being sort of 17, 18 years of age to being sort of 21 in the crew.
Yeah. So 21, when you hit the Awesome Foursome, your first Olympic Games as part of that team, Atlanta in 96.
Yes.
Geez, the butterflies would have been going as you're on the plane and you touched down ready to tackle Atlanta.
Yeah, well and truly, I was crapping myself, basically.
Yeah.
The benefit there was, having James, Mike, and Nick, and Noel, who had all been there before. James and Mike had rowed together since school, like 1985. Nick joined them in 1990. Noel had coached them from 1990 onwards. So they'd been through a lot of ups and downs, the World Championships together, the Barcelona Olympic Games where they had success. And they and the double skull in Barcelona, Peter Anthony and Stephen Hawkins, when they won gold, was an amazing little moment in time because it was the first time Australian rowing had won multiple gold medals or a gold medal at the Olympic Games. So to have that happen was pretty extraordinary. And then 4 years later to be, I suppose, having them mentor me through that process. But nervous as anything, not just the flight, but just the whole experience, but also highly competitive as well. So I was passionate to give it a real crack and do my best, but also I love the idea of being enthusiastic about it and being mentored by what I still think are some of the best athletes Australia's produced, not only in rowing, but also in sport as well.
When you're a new, when I say a new bloke, you're clearly not new by the time you get to Atlanta, but you are joining an established, well-credentialed team, right, for lack of a better term. And I appreciate we're talking at the gold medal level, but let sort of correlate that to a business sense. So somebody walking into a really well-established, humming team that have had years and years of success. What were some of the key attributes that you had to showcase and learn from as a result of that journey?
Yeah, there's probably a couple of parts to this I think that are important to articulate. So joining as a new member, I think what I helped with was I was enthusiastic and fresh. I had a real passion for just getting in and just doing whatever work was required. And I suppose I was encouraged to have a voice, which I really liked. I liked the guys didn't try to sort of quell my enthusiasm. I mean, they did guide it at times. And what you probably had as a nice mix and counterbalance to that was Mike in particular was very analytical, very driven, very determined and very well thought out, methodical in his mindset. James was really laid back and had a really good, carefree approach, but also he was just so precise in the things that he'd like to do technically on the water. And Nick had a really great rhythm and fluidity about him in terms of movement, but also complemented the guys really well. So I think there was unique attributes that the other guys had. And while Andrew Cooper, who was the previous Awesome Foursome member, was big and strong and quite boisterous, and he was a great compliment to them, it just meant that as a new member, I could sort of be myself and bring what I brought to it. But I think what they needed at the time was, someone with enthusiasm and a fair bit of passion to just give it a go, because they were not succeeding the year before. They came fifth at World Championships. So that little bit of new, fresh energy, I think, was really helpful. The other part too, in terms of bringing that crew together, was what I call a sort of critical forming meeting, which happened in Footscray in Mike's place in 1995, late. And Mike had been doing his MBA as he studied after he'd done his sports science degree. And so he was all very much in that space of wanting to plan things out and be really strategic about the event and how they were going to get from fifth to first again after being the Olympic champions. And so that forming meeting was amazing, where I got the chance to sort of hear about what they thought was going to drive and Hibbert's success, but they were also asking me for that as well. And while I didn't have experience, just being encouraged to have a voice and put your own ideas on the table was really powerful. And what came out of the meeting, interestingly, was just some simple things that we agreed as a group, and our coach included, that we would focus on that would drive success. And so I think what lay the way for me is someone working in teams and being a new member in that situation, but also bringing teams together, is always be really clear on where you're trying to get to, be really clear on the things that you think are going to help you succeed or hold you back, and then get really clear on making sure you follow through on the stuff that's got to be actionable. So that was 95. And what I was amazed by was in 96, the plan that we discussed about how we're going to row, length of stroke, row long, quality of stroke, row well, having fun and enjoying what we do. Those three things were discussed very early on in that meeting. The other part too was the benchmarking around speed, which I needed to be brought in on the process. But we just practiced things every single day that were about the plan. And eventually when the plan worked in 96, I looked back and went, like, it's bloody hard, but actually so much easier because you had a really clear plan. It was adaptive and all that sort of stuff to the circumstances. And it just gave a lot of confidence to the group. Gave a lot of confidence to me as a new member, that's for sure.
Did you pick the brain, or did you have anything to do with Andrew Cooper before you made the team or became a part of a team? Did you ask him any questions about his journey, or was it more about the Drew Ginn show and what have you?
Yeah. Coops I knew pretty well. In fact, I probably had a closer connection to Coops before going into the crew than the other members specifically. He was the sort of character who, larger than life, loved to have a joke, loved to have a beer, but endeared himself to people in such a way that he felt someone like you could go up and have a conversation with. So I remember many times at the rowing shed at school, having a chat to him, and sometimes there was a bit of the joke meant you had to sort of get through the joke and hear in the joke what he was actually getting across as a point. But I asked him a number of questions about the four, dealing with pressure, and dealing with being a key member of a crew, and what he felt the awesome foursome night needed. And I think his advice to me, if I remember correctly, was very much along the lines of just be yourself and trust yourself and back yourself. You've got the job in the boat now, and you can believe that they're good enough and you're good enough and that'll be good enough together, sort of thing. And so he made a decision, interestingly, Matt, that is pretty rare. Like for an athlete who's at the very highest level, to pull out and withdraw from a build up to an event because he decided it was no longer his drive and motivation to be there, was amazing. But yeah, his advice to me, I thought was good. Just so simple, just cutting through all the bullshit and just basically telling you to be who you need to be to live your own life, but also knowing a little bit about the characters in the crew. He knew what Mike was like and James and Nick were like, and he knew what would add value to them as well. And so that was really helpful.
Yeah, nice bit of mentorship. Do you remember, Drew, the first time that you actually won your first gold medal?
The 96 one? Yes.
Yeah. Elation, no doubt. You finally hit Everest after years and years and years of doing what you did to be able to get there?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm probably remembering now memories of, right, and the stories we tell ourselves and the stories you hear and all that sort of stuff. And a lot of what I remember about 96 now is through, I suppose, the visual of watching the race for years gone by and hearing the way people describe it. But there's a couple of things I remember vividly. One was the morning of the Olympic Games final. And I'll put this in perspective for you is, I'm 21 years of age, right? So I've never been there before. I've never done it before. But I'm confident that by sticking to the plan that we've practiced, that it was going to work. I was confident also the group of guys that I was around and our coach were the best in the world, right? So that gave me an elevation.
Yep.
But the morning of it, about 3:30 in the morning, we get a bang on the door at the college we were staying at, and it's the fire brigade coming through to get us to clear the rooms.
No way.
And I've turned to James and I'm sort of going like bleary-eyed, going, what the heck's going on? And we initially thought it was one of the other national teams playing a practical joke on us, right? Yep. So we were staying out of the village. Don't know if you ever remember that, but that was Centennial Square, had a bomb go off in Centennial Square that morning.
Right.
And so we've been woken up at the fire brigade. We finally get outside. They inform us that a bomb threat had been made to the college where the Australian team was staying. Now, unbeknownst to us, there was no real threat. It was someone who was living locally who either thought it was a bit of a joke or something like that. But what was amazing, just to put that in context, was first thing you thought of the people that had been hurt, and I think someone died or a couple of people died in that bomb. Then you also realise the Olympic Games is happening in and around you, and you've got this so-called race event on at 11:20 that morning, and this is still 4 o'clock in the morning, standing out in the middle of this oval in the dark.
Yeah. And
Noel Donaldson had the clarity to turn around and say, look, that's happened. We can't do anything about that. We're being informed that racing's still going ahead because it hasn't impacted any other rowing teams. And so he decided to take us to the rowing course, get us on the water for a pre-row paddling session, which we wouldn't have done until about 7 o'clock that morning, but we still had planned to do it. And as we were getting to the car, and this is just what just blew our minds effectively and literally, like we were sort of getting into the car and all of a sudden, I can't remember who it was, Nick or Mike, jokingly jumped out of the car to jump down and make sure everything was safe and all that sort of stuff. And then so I remember my heart skipping and thinking to myself, how can this be happening when you put all this work into the Olympic Games? And I suppose you just realise how things can derail very, very quickly. But that was one of those surreal moments in contrast to having the rest of the experience of the day go almost perfectly to plan. But those things can derail you really quickly. And the only other thing I remember vividly was just paddling up to the start line with Mike, sitting in the stroke seat, Nick and James sitting behind him. And I asked the guys to ease the oar and stop rowing for a second, and I could hardly breathe. And they spun around and joked that it was exactly how they felt 4 years earlier in Barcelona. And just the fact that they joked about it, they laughed about it, they could see that I was apprehensive and all that sort of stuff put me at ease. But that was possibly 20 minutes before the race. And other than that, there was some key memories like that, which just didn't really relate to a whole lot of people other than just the crew.
Yeah.
You have great memories of that. And I think the feeling of winning gold is extraordinary, but it's really hard to connect to that these days, only because there's so much that goes around the memorable moments of big successes in the Olympic Games. But I do remember vividly having James nudge me on the podium to say, watch the flag go up, let's sing the national anthem really well. And we sang that terribly, apparently. But it's all your Christmases come at once, that's for sure.
Yeah, you got to sing it. That's the point of it all.
Exactly.
Who was your biggest competitor or rival at the time in Atlanta? Do you remember who it was?
Yeah, the Italians. Awesome crew. They won the 2 world championships the year before. They had the world's best time as well. When they first won in '94 in Indianapolis, they set the world record, dominated the world, and they were young guys themselves. In Finland the next year, they won again against the Brits, but by hardly any margin. That's when the Awesome Foursome raced them, and I was racing in an 8 in Finland. And the way they rode was super aggressive, just with a lot of passion and a lot of just real belief around just make it physical. And if people can keep up with you, then that's great. But generally, people weren't willing to row as physical as they were. We raced them a number of times in the Olympic Games year. And what I remember vividly was we got closer and closer and closer, and we finally knocked them off a regatta on the Bosbaan in Amsterdam. And it was almost like the turning point. You realise they'd worked so damn hard to be dominant. Yeah. And finally, we put a chink in their armour, and you could almost sort of feel that sort of spelled their end at that sort of time in terms of their run. They ended up getting 6th at the Olympic Games, but they came back in Sydney and got silver behind the Brits. So an amazing 8-year period for a group of young athletes at the time. That they were pretty extraordinary as a crew, that's for sure.
Harder to be the chaser and going after someone who's already done it, or harder to stay on top when you're on top?
Oh, I think it's always harder to stay out in front. I think there's a couple of things that I think that are important in what I've noticed is if someone's leading a competition or they're the highest standards and all that sort of stuff, you've always got them to look to. And if you get beaten by them and you get slightly closer, you start to get a bit of confidence out of that. Yep. You're always assessing what the gap is. You're always assessing why that gap might be there. I think the times that I've felt that we've been out in front as a crew, mentally you feel defensive. You feel like people are attacking you and they're trying to work out how to get closer. But the trick to that I've always found is almost imagine that there's a crew always faster than you. And what we used to do a lot of in 2004 and then 2008 in particular was set our benchmarks so considerably ahead of the world standard that it meant that the line that we were chasing, even though it was invisible and hadn't yet been done, like an example being the men's pair, the world record had been set at 6:14, and in the lead up to 2008, in our minds, we were going for 6:08, and we'd been training to that benchmark. And so that was hard, but we were doing it on a daily basis. And what was noticeable was that kept us out in front of the field by a long way, and no one really got close to us. But I think if we had taken the defensive mindset, that would have been problematic, but definitely easier, I think, going after someone than having people go after you.
I'll get to the actionable content, but this is more selfish stuff. Can we get a peek behind the curtain of Olympic Village? Is it friendship? Is it kill or be killed? Is there genuine rivalry? Is it you stay in your lane and they stay in theirs? Or is there a genuine mixing of the fact that, hey, I'm an Olympian and you're an Olympian?
Is this what happens on ZOOMCAST stays on ZOOMCAST?
Well, we've got 17 listeners, Drew. I don't think you're going to offend anyone too hard.
No, just joking, mate. No, look, I think there's a real positive around the Olympic Village. I'll give you an example that I first remember going into the Olympic Village in '96, and it wasn't a great Atlanta Olympic Games. Was a bit piecemeal, but you walk into the village, you walk into the food hall, and when there's business to be done, then the athletes are focused and everyone sort of does their own thing. There's little pleasantries and all that sort of stuff. But as competitions are finishing up, you start to sort of see, I think, the great benefit of Olympianism, which is there's friendly, there's great relationships, there's people around the world, there's people that have sacrificed a lot to be athletes and get there. Yeah. And then they get a chance to sort of take the blinkers off and really look around at each other. And it's quite amazing how people do connect. And sometimes it's just connecting in friendship, sometimes it's connection in other ways. But what's amazing is you've got this camaraderie, which is everyone knows they've worked their backsides off for 3 years, 4 years, 8 years, whatever it might be, and everyone knows how hard it is to get a medal, let alone things like gold medals and stuff like that. So I think there's a real respect amongst the athletes, win, lose or draw, that you've gotten through your competition in your country. You've competed internationally. You're from all these different sports, multidisciplined, and it's pretty cool to see. And I think the other one you notice is as things are wrapping up, people are getting much more jovial about sort of the wrap-up parties and all that sort of stuff. And then people start spending a lot of time with each other. So
Yeah.
I remember in the lead up to the 96 end of the games, I'd spent a lot of time with some of the British athletes because socially it was just like the games are over, there are other rowers, we're hanging out together.
Yeah.
And you've still stayed connected with some of these people, what's that, 23, 24 years later sort of thing. So you can imagine the connections and the bonds that get formed. But yeah, when you're first there, it is all competition and it's all very serious and focused, but it certainly lightens up, that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Outside of the rowing world, who were you keen to meet from a sporting world? Was there anyone you had your eye on at the time? I mean, professional athlete.
Well, it's interesting. So I did have a thing about meeting Roger Federer years ago, and then I got a chance to meet him. And so I'm not a name dropper, but I will share it in this situation.
Please.
Really good friend of mine, Troy Ayres, was coaching tennis at Tennis Australia in the Pathway. And one day he asked me that same question at a coffee shop in Domain. And I turned around and said, Roger Federer would be pretty amazing just to understand his mindset and, what he's like at the end of the court. Does he craft the point up against his competitor? Is he like a chess player in that regard, or is it instinctual? What is it? And Troy sort of took that on notice. And then next thing you know, about 6 months later, he rang me and said, hey, by the way, do you want to come down to the tennis centre? And I said, what do you mean? He goes, Federer is going to be down here practicing tomorrow. We can get you in and you can come and watch the session. And
no way. What
was amazing about it was he was playing with some young guy that was helping in pre-warm-up match sort of material. And he was playing in such a way. Now, I've never seen this ever, but I'd heard something about it since. And this young guy had him, back one corner, back the next corner, out of the court.
Yeah. And
eventually Federer managed to get this ball and flick the racket, and he's gone straight past this young guy down the back corner. And the young guy sat there and just dropped his head and goes, what do I do? I've got him so out of position, and he still gets a shot back like that.
Yeah.
And then Federer runs around the back of the court, squealing like a little kid and jumping and skipping. And I was like, I turned to Troy and I said, is that for real? And Troy said, I've never seen that. I can't never imagine it.
Yeah.
So I get a chance when he comes back through the dugout area and chatted to him for about, 10 or 15 minutes. And I had a couple of key questions I want to ask. I said, but mate, what I just saw there, is that what goes on? He goes, yeah, but I love tennis.
Yeah.
But he seemed to contain that out on the stage so that no one ever knew. And then after that, I was watching him and you sort of go, he's become such a master at just the facade, no sweating, no facial expression.
Yep.
But then what you saw recently when he retired is there was a lot of emotion, right?
A lot of emotion.
And so I reckon on the inside, he was playing like the little kid all the time. It just didn't let on. So that was someone I wanted to see. And the question I asked him was about, it was almost like, how did he set up points and score? And I tell you, it sounded like some sort of master of 9 moves of chess, where he's sort of going, I'm doing this to set you up in 9 moves or more. And he'd just go, I've moved you here, I've moved you there, I've moved you there, and eventually I've just put the shot away. And you know how you'd see him play a backhand shot and you just go, just look easy and graceful. But it's almost like he knows exactly that he doesn't have to overplay it because he's got the person in exactly the right position to be able to play that shot easily. So that for me wasn't just the shot being played, it was actually the crafting of the tactics to get to that shot and make it easy. So that was really cool.
Wow. Well, I reckon he'd be right at the top of my list and most people's list. He's a champion of champions, that guy. Hey, take me. So you're doing what you're doing with the Awesome Force, and one thing that stands out amongst everything that you've mentioned since the moment you joined them is just this aspect of teamwork. That without one, the other doesn't succeed, and vice versa. We could do 9 hours on teamwork, but are there a couple of key takeaways that will stay with you for the rest of your professional life and your personal life about what you learnt whilst being as part of the Awesome Force in relation to teamwork?
Yeah, definitely. I think if I was to reference key takeaways, it's just the overarching thing is always the group is more important than the individual.
Yeah.
And that can't just be a cognitive thought or mindset. It has to be really felt. And the reason why I say really felt is because I think the breakthrough moment is when you really feel like the other people that you're working with have got your back and trust you and support you, can be honest with you, challenge you, all that sort of stuff. I think when you really feel that sense of connection, relationship that elevates things, then it's not just words about, the business is more important than the individual, the team's more important than the individual. It goes beyond that to the point where you're actually living the behaviours properly, I think, and they're things that you trust. And when you don't live those sort of behaviours, you have honest conversations about someone who you think is either being selfish or looking after themselves or doing things in a way that isn't necessarily going to help the group. So there's another piece here.
Sorry to interject you. How does that happen? How do you have an honest conversation with someone? That is a challenging thing for a lot of people to do.
Yeah.
You hear the murmurings around the water cooler about the thought process around a certain individual or something that's occurred, but to actually confront that issue can be bloody tough.
Definitely. So I'll give you the example in 96. So late 1995, one of the things that came out of that meeting I mentioned before was we'd have to have honest conversations.
Right.
That was going to become one of the key drivers in this group coming together. Now, I didn't quite understand the reason why they were saying it as a group, but they also probably felt there was a bit of history there that they weren't yet broaching as a subject. For me, on the surface, I just heard honesty and went, "Oh, cool, that's what we've got to do. We've got to be honest," right? So I was pretty naive. The way that played out was we had regular meetings that we were referencing. Let's be honest. Let's get to the truth of the matter. Let's put all that stuff on the table. Let's get really clear and discuss things properly. Now, where this played out was when we got third in a semi-final in Atlanta, and everything blew up. Fingers are being pointed at each other. Blame game massively. And the only person I didn't see that day point the finger at anyone was our coach. He stood there in the room, air-conditioned tent in Atlanta, and he just watched this all unravel. And I was a young kid thinking to myself, hold on, like stuff's being pointed at everyone. And I didn't really feel like it was overly being pointed at me as a young bloke so much, but I certainly felt things were being directed in certain ways.
Right.
And what I realised was there was a heap of stuff that had gone unsaid, even though we tried and practiced honesty. So here's the first part to it. It is a practice. It's like building up a muscle. If you don't use it, you're no good at it. You stuff it up, it becomes awkward. There's more damage to a relationship by being honest and brutally honest. I always hear that word all the time. Yeah. I would never encourage someone to be brutally honest. I would encourage someone to dig deeper into the layers of the things they want to share that are their truth. Have the right conversation with the right person. Never talk third party. That is always disastrous because that always spins out of control. Right. But the awesome foursome were very good at bringing everyone in, having the meeting, trying to have the conversation that was important. But it took a full 12 months to get to the stage where finally the last meeting we had before the final 2 days out was what we finally termed the honesty conversation, the honesty meeting. And so while we practiced trying to be honest, this was the breakthrough moment where finally there was a bit of vulnerability shown by a key leader with Mike, who said that he held back in the semi-final and he had more to give. Guys like James and Nick sort of went, well, we didn't really hold back, but certainly if you feel like you can do more, this is what we think we can do to get behind you. Now, you can imagine 15 minutes prior to this meeting, there's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of how's this all going to play out, and that semi-final result, well, maybe that's it, right? So one bit of action in the semi-final had everyone now feeling like, geez, maybe we don't have quite the relationship we thought we had. Maybe we don't quite have the ability and we don't quite have the trust and the confidence. So all I'm saying there is it's practice. If an athlete does, X number of training sessions a week, 14 training sessions a week, and we're having 1 or 2 meetings a week, they're probably not having all those meetings as honesty meetings, and every single training session is not really going into the great depths of that sort of stuff. But I think when it comes times that are relationship-based, that are tough, if you don't understand people's values or what's really important to them, if you don't understand what's frustrating them, what is irking them about you and you about them, if you haven't been willing to share that sort of stuff, it's amazing how under pressure those things usually blow up. But I see all the time that people do the third party or the external scenario where they'll go and complain to someone else and complain to someone else, complain to someone else. Inherently, that always gets back and makes it worse. Yeah. So my thing is, if you're going to feel something about someone that bugs you or frustrates you, have the confidence to at least go and try to find having that conversation with them and see how it goes. Don't go to being brutally honest or honest, but just test the waters. And I think that's the only advice I'd ever give people is sample it, go a bit deeper, build the relationship, build the bond, go a bit deeper. And if the person's really up for getting great feedback and you are the same, it's amazing how great bond can be created that way.
You mentioned something at the start of it, which was basically saying that you're asking permission to have honest conversations first and foremost. What about when you might have had a relationship with somebody that somewhere along the line it's gone awry, and you're not the greatest friends of all time, but you're certainly not the greatest enemies either, but you'd like that relationship to become stronger or better. Is it just about getting back to basics and saying, look, I acknowledge that some things haven't quite hit the mark. I want to hit restart on this. Can we open up to one another and have some honest conversations about where I think this is going well and where we can improve?
Yeah, definitely. I think, mate, that's great advice. Even in what you've just sort of mentioned there is, I think, start with being vulnerable self, right? Yep. Yeah, like start with why you're acknowledging this, right? And so my thing is, as an athlete, it was always about taking responsibility for how you've contributed to it. And if you feel that the relationship's strained in some way, take responsibility for that part that you really feel like you played, and don't look for it to come back the other way. Just then give permission to say you want to start from square one and rebuild in some sort of way. The other one for me is then calling out what you'd like out of the relationship. I remember watching with Duncan Free and I in the lead up to Beijing, where we had a couple of moments on the water about 4 weeks out from the Olympic Games. He eventually stormed off, went back to the hotel room. 2 or 3 hours later, my coach and I sitting in the room with him, and I had to declare how I was feeling about it all and what I felt like I'd done to contribute to that sort of situation. And I didn't expect anything back, but I did sort of lay claim that I said, look, I'd love for us to make sure we've got a stronger connection than ever. And this is just one of those steps along the way. And the reason why I'd love that is because I think for us to perform in Beijing, that's what we're going to need, So I think being clear about what you want out of the relationship, being clear about the responsibility sort of makes a lot of sense. But yeah, you've got to offer that up. I think about a bit of vulnerability there, but you've also got to ask for permission to actually develop the relationship better if they want the same thing.
Yeah, well said. Well said. I'm going to ask you a question without notice because I've just sort of thought of it on the run. So you're an athlete, you're part of a team, and that team performance is literally what you live by and die by in terms of who you are as an athlete. So the team either wins, they come second, they come third, they don't place, etc. So everything you do is team orientated. If I can pull that ideology out of high-level professional sport and put it into a business sense or a corporate sense, if one person's winning in a real estate sense and their colleague isn't winning but is on the same team, what am I trying to say? How does that, do you sort of see where I'm going with that? How does that work in terms of, we do live by the sword and die by the sword. So the more people that list and sell real estate in our team, the better we are because we've got more stories to tell and more connections to make. But how do you bring someone along on the journey if somebody's winning and someone's not?
Yeah, well, there's a bit in what you're describing there, Matt. And so I think that's the challenge. I think when you've got an industry that's largely fueled by individual performance, I think it's easy to then forget how many people might contribute to that performance. So in rowing, I know full well I can still be ego driven. I can still be thinking about myself, and I can convince myself that by doing that, that's going to make the boat go faster. My heart of hearts, I haven't seen many athletes succeed without that real humble sort of realization that, you know what, I can be bloody good, but without 2 other teammates or 3 other teammates or whatever it is, or without the person who's built the boat, without the person who's done all these various things in my training program, like I'm not really going to get there. So we still get individual people who think they're individuals. But I think when you reward in real estate so individually, then it becomes very hard for some people to work collaboratively and help others. But it's interesting, Marshall White, we're a massive business, really, 300 plus, team members all up, in all the offices. So, but the business is only there, the brand's only there because there's more than one. And so the one realization I think everyone has to have is even if you think you're driving for individual success, and real estate's probably the activity that you can sort of be forgiven for thinking that's actually real, the reality is there's not many individual real estate agents out there standing by themselves. And they've got business managers, they've got EAs, they've got prospectors. Now, if they're any good, they're a part of a big business somewhere, and so therefore the business wouldn't be there unless there's multiple other people that are actually working in. So I think the industry has that tweak around individual, but I do believe more and more of the businesses seem to be growing in such a way that you need to wake up and realise that collaborating, working together across teams, leaders working with people in their teams and outside their teams, working across offices. I think the dominance of the market actually gets achieved better and more sustainably, probably is my suspicion, when you actually work out how to be more of a team player. And that's also the legacy of the business, I think, as well. So use the Awesome Foursome. The Awesome Foursome is known for having success 1990 all the way through to 96. So that's a 6-year journey.
Yeah.
But the Awesome Foursome still gets referenced and got referenced in Tokyo when the men's and women's fours won in Tokyo. Now, they're not the same athletes.
Right.
But there's this Awesome Foursome legacy of the 4 athletes. Now, the original Awesome Foursome wasn't just 4 athletes either. Right. So Sam Patton wasn't at the Olympic Games. Andrew Cooper wasn't at the second Olympic Games. Nick Green was there. There was another guy at Mercantile Rowing Club, another 2 athletes at Mercantile Rowing Club early days. There's been all these athletes have been a part of that journey who have either won medals, missed out on medals all the way through. And eventually in Tokyo, you had 8 athletes, 4 guys, 4 girls, all saying legacy of the Awesome Foursome is something that inspired them for all those years. So even an individual athlete in that sense appreciates they're building on something that's come before them. And I think in real estate, and I like what's happening in Marshall White now. I love the idea that it's bigger than all of us. Yeah. And so I think the more we wake up to that and realise that we've got a responsibility around that, but there's a massive opportunity to work together and really collaborate and imagine the things could be achieved that way.
Yeah, mate, your passion and your energy from the rowing side transitions beautifully, I think, into corporate world and what you're doing at Marshall White Bayside. Can I take you back to day one, week one at Marshall White? So you've come in, you're this high profile athlete, Olympic gold medalist, and people are going, who the hell is Drew Ginn from a Marshall White real estate perspective? What you've done in such a short amount of time and that huge word culture, I think, comes back to a part of where you've been succeeding most. What were some of the key pillars that you wanted to put in play early? Was it getting to know each individual on a personal level and what makes them tick, and then putting that into the greater good? Is that the way you went about it?
Yeah, definitely. And in fact, I've learned some valuable lessons, and I've created some of my own issues in the past. So I'll talk briefly about a couple of experiences that helped me really frame up the entry into here. So when I was at Rowing Australia, I transitioned in 2012 as an athlete in London, silver medals with the 4. The very next year, I was the head coach of the national team. Really quick, strange transition, how you go from being an athlete in the boat to now being the head coach of the national team. But I'd been working for Melbourne Business School. I'd had my own businesses. So when they went to recruit and I got the opportunity, I had 14 national team coaches who were all sitting there going, how's this guy think he's going to help us coach better when he doesn't know anything about coaching because he's been the athlete in the boat? The mistake I made then is I went into that situation going, well, I know the sport and I can see where we've got to go and I've got some ideas. So I was quite bullish in my attitude. And so you pointed out there, my passion, I am enthusiastic. I always have been about things. And so the mistake I made was I tried to jump forward way too far without having the connection and the relationships and all that sort of stuff. So I learned that really valuable lesson when I was the head coach of Rowing Australia. Right. When I went into Cricket Tasmania as high performance manager, again, knew nothing about the sport. I remember meeting the head coach Adam Griffiths for the male team down there the first time. And I had it in my mind straight away, which is I'm going to spend a lot of time, develop a relationship, get to know them, get to know their sport, get to really understand the nuances of it. And then just offer up the idea that if I've got a perspective from outside, if they want to hear it, I can help then. And so it just took my time. Yeah. The benefit then is that what I saw at Cricket Tasmania was I got traction with people through the relationship and I was able to have a bigger impact after 6 months than trying to do all this stuff at the first 6 months. So arriving at Marshall White day one, the benefit, Matt, was the first 2 weeks in Brighton here, there was hardly anyone around. Yeah. And so I remember doing through a bit of the induction, spending a bit of time getting across the systems. But really what I did was the same thing I did at Cricket Tasmania, which I said, well, once I start getting a chance to do one-on-ones with everyone, my job in the one-on-ones I've decided, which was I want to get to know you, as you sort of said. Yep. So I'm just going to listen and pay attention. I'm not even going to take notes initially. Just be really present in the conversations and just ask questions about what they thought of the business, what they thought of Marshall White broadly, what they thought of the real estate market in Brighton, what they thought of what's gone on in the last 3 or 4 months. And so I tried to just reassure people as I was meeting that everything they were sharing with me was just for me to understand. I wasn't using it in any way. And so that's a bit of trust building, I suppose, in that regard. Yeah. A little bit of time taken there as well. But I then did start to say to people as I was doing one-on-ones that I'll go from getting to know you, getting a sense of what you're about. I'll start to look for what the themes are. And then I'll start to report back on the themes, And so one of the key ones was people not either feeling respected or not having a great connection between sales and admin and, say, property management. That came out really clearly. There was a little bit around the leaders seem to be successful in the business, but often there's a gap between what the leaders are achieving and what everyone else is achieving. There's some people that left the business. So all these things were percolating in my mind, but it was really the one-on-ones were just taking the time to get to know them. And then when I sort of felt ready to start to go, I'm starting to see some patterns here. I wanted to sense check with the group. And I think the directors here had been fantastic with just giving me a bit of license to come in and actually make a difference. And they were expecting that. But I think I took the first 3 to 4 weeks in particular to sort of formulate a bit of thinking. And I had a 90-day plan for myself, but it meant that it was a slow start. But then when the time was right was to be able to sort of make a couple of changes. And so a few simple changes, like just changing our meeting, the purpose of our meetings, and just changing some of the things that we did in our meetings. And even for the owners of the business, turning it to a quarterly meeting, but making it much more purposeful and, having the conversation with people like Jack and Simon around why we would do it that way. So I had confidence in some of the process stuff, but I just needed to build up a bit of currency with people first. And look, I don't think it's been me. I think it's actually been the group who have been waiting for an opportunity for someone to come in who is quite neutral and just help guide a little bit of those steps that we take together. And it's amazing how the feeling of everyone lifting together now. I'm watching more and more people have autonomy and make their choices about how they want their business to be. And I say their business, it's not just the owners, it's everyone who's involved. It's the collective business together. So, so it started out of one-on-ones, but I think it just started out of people just taking a bit of time to realise that there was someone here who cared and going to try to make a difference with that.
Drew, do you think there's a place for real estate or other businesses where the person doesn't necessarily have to have done real estate? And appreciate Dad was an agent, of course, but you bring a different level of thinking, a different view on the world, past experiences, personal experiences that lead you to become the leader you are?
Yeah, I think there's a missed opportunity here. Is real estate businesses are sales businesses.
Yeah,
and there are millions of sales businesses all around the world where the lead person, the CEO, chairman of the board, aren't necessarily the person who is in the best salesperson in the team.
Yeah.
And so I think where the real estate businesses have grown is the natural extension is the person who's been the most successful, been the most capable, takes on the leadership role. And that's great, right? Because you've got these real estate businesses all around the country doing really well. And Marshall White's just an example of that. But I think when you look at examples broadly of sales businesses that are highly successful, it's often not the CEO who's been the best salesperson. So I think, realizing that if you're going to grow a business, I'll use the Bayside example right now. It's 29 in the team here. To manage 29 people means that you want someone who's got time to do the one-on-one, spend time with them, probably largely not be competing with them or against them in that regard, not to use the negative there.
Yep.
But I've seen some of the other office directors in Marshall White and I feel really a lot of empathy for them. They're trying to sell, they're trying to run and lead their own team. They're a part of that. They're trying to stay successful in their own right. And then they're trying to help lead their business. And I think they're a great salesperson, but most of them would say, I think, if you had a phone call with them or a chat with them, I don't quite have all the skills to lead and run this business in this way. And so I think bringing people in that have either got management experience or leadership experience is probably a smart idea. But you also don't just want to bring people in thinking that they're assuming that they're going to know how to run a team like this. I think my unique experiences with cricket reminds me a lot of this is like managing very talented athletes with very talented head coaches and all that sort of stuff. So not everyone's going to have those kind of skill sets when you've run different businesses, but I think some of the structures you try to put in place when you get to certain sizes are really important to understand. I think when you get to about 15 to 20, then you need someone to help manage that group. But you probably need someone who can actually step out of the group, and that's probably not happened in a lot of situations, and I think that'll keep evolving.
Yeah, really well said. I've got to shout out Damien O'Sullivan down at Albert Park. I think he's one of the best leaders I've come across in real estate, and he won't listen to this, so he won't care about the plug. But he's just got a beautiful way, I reckon, of being firm but fair. So he's a mate, but if he told me to jump, I'd still say how high. And I think that's a beautiful blend of leadership in that capacity.
Yeah.
Hey, you're a family man. Melanie, your wife, you've got Kyra at 21, Jasper at 17. How do you get that work-life balance, Drew? It's probably a question that I ask a lot of people, and the answers are varied.
I've never had work-life balance in my life, and I probably find it a misnomer of sorts. It's 6 o'clock on a Monday night. It's a public holiday to tomorrow, Matt, and we're here in the office.
We are, mate. We are.
And what can I say about that? So I think I fully appreciate the need to do work and get work done, and I've probably had my own challenges at times where I've got, call it the balance out of whack completely, and I try to be really mindful of that. I think I've been the athlete where I was obsessive about sport.
Yeah.
Competing, training long hours. My wife, Melanie, probably was the one that sacrificed more than anyone else in my life. And I think that's what we've got a really strong connection because we've both been through quite a lot. And I think for my kids, I think they appreciate that when I was an athlete overseas on tour, if they were sort of traveling with me for 3 or 4 weeks, they get my attention for 2 hours of the day. Yeah. Those 2 hours, my eyes might not be fully open because I'm pretty tired and exhausted anyway. But I always used to apologise for the fatigue or for not being present, all that sort of stuff. And I think, as a parent, you can only be honest about, being aware of that sort of stuff. I think the worst kind of situation there is to not be aware of not being present or not be aware of being a bit grumpy or a bit tired and all that sort of stuff. So for me, I think it's never in balance. I think it's always oscillating. And, I certainly know that, when you take a holiday now or when you take a holiday over the years is you try to spend as much time being with those that you love and really enjoying that. And when you're busy and you're on, you really do that as well as you possibly can. So, I think and this is the thing I noticed with a lot of the agents, a lot of people working in real estate is it's a full-on job.
Yeah.
And you can see what that takes away from families. And I think just by being kinder to self is what I've sort of encouraged a few people to be kinder to self. It's actually okay. Tomorrow's still going to be okay and all that sort of stuff. And spending a bit of time with a partner or with the kids and just being with them for that half an hour, 40 minutes, switching everything off. I know we've done on a leadership program recently has been quite fascinating doing meditation. And I think all the agents in the room were probably really skeptical at the start of all that. After 4 days, they're all sort of saying, actually, this is a real benefit for all of us in busy lives, not just the agents. But I think it's never in balance, but certainly you can get back your time and you can have a bit more quality of those sort of times when you're there rather than sort of having 10 things on your mind and kids in front of you sort of going, well, those 10 things, I'm not going to do anything about them for the next half an hour, so I may as well just park it and leave it to the side. And I think that's a skill that over time I've developed better. Certainly years ago, I used to get more worried and stressed about those sort of things that were on my mind. And, you get better as you get a bit older, I think.
Are you a podcast guy? Are you an audiobook guy? Are there things that make your mind tick still to this day?
Yeah, I like podcasts that random information and facts. So stuff you should know. Two guys I love listening to regularly, and I do that in the morning on the way to drive in the car.
Yep.
Any long trips, podcasts go on.
Yep.
There's certain people I like listening to, music as well, but I like reading. But because I read so much during the day when you're at work, I find myself not reading at nighttime or that sort of stuff because I want to switch off. But I love listening to stuff.
Yeah.
And so what's your favourite podcast at the moment?
Well, obviously ZOOMCAST. Thank you.
This one.
True. No, I love. Look, I'm a sports nut, so I love the Howie games. I love the ability to escape from real estate from time to time and get into the mind of high profile athletes and their journey and their story. That's my favourite thing in the world to do. Whether it's a footy player, whether it's an F1 driver, it's something I've always been passionate about. So this, of course, will be available on Spotify and iTunes. Drew, again, I reckon I'm going to let you go. Go and enjoy the rest of your Halloween and back a winner in the Cup tomorrow. Don't follow Jack's advice, for God's sake, otherwise you'll be broke. But, mate, I appreciate you coming on and giving us some time and reviving this humble little ZOOMcast.
Cheers, Matt. Well done.
Thanks, mate.